Hi, my name is Will, and welcome to today's episode of the Salesman Podcast. On today's episode, we're looking at what salespeople get wrong about sales qualification. Our guest is Andy Whyte. Andy is the founder of MEDDICC.com and author of MEDDICC, the book. Andy's been on the show before. He's a legend. I'm excited to speak with you. Andy, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much, Will. It's great to be back on the show once again. I had so much great feedback from people who are your audience from last time. So it was a joy to be invited back on. Thank you very much.
You are more than welcome. I'm glad to hear that feedback. Okay, so let's not mess around. Give us if you can, a definition, a one line of what sales qualification is. The audience should know this, but just in case they don't. And then we're going to get into what people are getting wrong in this space.
Yeah, it's a big question because I think as you kind of hinted there, people get this wrong a lot. And I think there's a few reasons for that, which we can definitely get into. But for me, what qualification is about identifying with your prospect, with your prospective customer, whether there is enough value that you can provide to them, whether they have enough, pain or goals they're striving to achieve that your solution can help them to achieve. If the value in that is large enough for it to be worth your while and their while, because we're asking them to invest their time, their energy, their expertise, just as much as we're asking ourselves to invest with them. Is there enough value in that to make it worth my while and the customer's while? That is, for me, what qualification is all about.
Do you blow people's minds when you frame it up like that, Andy, of sales, when done correctly, should be an exchange of value between a salesperson and a buyer, right? It should be an adult conversation. And if we're in a position where we've got to suck up to potential customers as salespeople, we're either selling a crappy product, we've approached the conversation the wrong way from the outset, or they're just not qualified. Do you find that people go, like a light bulb clicks on when you frame it up that we're exchanging value and solving a pain as opposed to just talking features and benefits?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, but I think it's one of those things that seems very obvious when you say it, but when people are actually in the moment, it's less visible to them for them to see it. And I think if you think about what you just described there as the sort of the negative approach that we have in our industry, that we frequently have, where we're almost apologetic for being salespeople. When we approach sales with that mindset of thank you very much for your time. It's a great pleasure to meet you. I'll be very, very brief. I'll get straight into it. All that kind of mindset, that reverberates with the customer, and then they therefore perceive you that way. So even if they were like, great, I'm really excited to meet Will today. I've heard great things about his company. My friend actually has worked with Will before. You may not know this. And so when you engage with a customer that way, almost apologetic, they straight away sort of subconsciously or consciously sort of lower their perception of the value that you're going to bring to the table. Because the opposite to that is if you go into a conversation and you stand firm, you stand tall because your solution has tremendous value to offer. You shouldn't be working for the company you're working for if you don't genuinely believe that. And so you go into the conversation with the mindset of, I have tremendous value to offer this customer. I've still got to qualify this, but based on my product market fit in this sector, based on the references I have, based on the great feedback I have from my customers, I know I have genuine value to offer this customer. So I'm going to engage based on that confidence. And here's the really good bit is if that customer doesn't see that, then I want to also give the impression of if you're not prepared to enter into, as you said very eloquently, a value exchange with me, then I've got 10 other customers queuing up to talk to me because my solution is that good. That is all in a mindset for me. And I think that's very, very important, but it's also very infectious. If you go into conversations that way, then you're going to make the customer feel like, wow, this person's really here to talk value. They're really here to talk business. I believe that they must have some value to offer me. And so it's sort of almost like a fork in the road, and you can go down the one way of being apologetic or being very, very confident.
I think the cliched way to frame this up is perhaps you go into the conversation as a consultant, right? And it's a consultative sell. And we've all heard this, but it doesn't really mean anything. And I found that's not necessarily the most practical way to look at it. Something that I teach over at Salesman Academy and something that I do literally on calls every single day is I will start the conversation, do a bit of small talk, 10, 20 seconds, then I'll use this line. Hey, this is how this call usually goes. Blah, 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 and then explain how these calls usually go. And you typically get most people go, okay, great. And then they fall into the conversation and the questions that you want to ask. Sometimes people go, oh, I don't care. I just want to ask about this, or just tell me your pricing, or I'm ready to go. In which case I'll go, oh, great. Well, okay. Well, the way that these calls usually go is that we go blah, 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 and go through it again. And I find that's a real practical way of implementing this, I guess, like strategic consultative approach to sales calls specifically. It's more difficult to do that over an email. It's very easy to do that in person. But I like to frame it up that you want to be the doctor, right? And we'll go through this with qualification in a second. You sit there. You're non-judgmental, you're asking intelligent questions, you're hopefully making the prospect think a layer deeper than what they have done in the past as you do question them, and they're hopefully getting value from the conversation because you're perhaps uncovering what their real needs are, you're uncovering they think they want this solution, but you know with your insights that there's a better solution in the market for them. It may be with your company, it may be with another company, but when you go into a conversation using that line, hey, this is the way these calls usually go. And then you dive into outlining what the call goes like. And then you frame it up in your own mind that you're a doctor, you're here to understand the patient and then prescribe them a solution. I find that really gets that consultative approach really practically nailed on people's heads.
Yeah, I love the way you said that, and I'll probably be stealing your line there a little bit. Actually, I like it a lot. Don't you think it's funny, or don't you find that? I think everybody understands what you said there about the consultative approach. I think we buy into that. I think we, in our industry, we understand the value, for want of a better word, of the consultative approach. But we also, I think where we get it wrong in our industry is we disassociate being the consultative approach from selling. And what I mean by that, and the best way I can articulate this, is if you think of like a typical LinkedIn salesperson's title these days, if they're not calling themselves an account executive or whatever their actual job role, on their job description is, they tend to sort of come up with titles that try to give the illusion that they're a consultant rather than a salesperson. And they're not doing that from the basis of I'm here to be a consultative approach. Or maybe they are a little bit, but they're trying to disassociate themselves from sales. And I always think that's funny because I always laugh because I think, well, what's going to happen? Are you going to get into, what is in my industry of like, technology sales, an average sort of anything like a 3 to a 6 month average sales cycle. Are you going to get sort of 5-6 months in and sort of just sneakily slide an order form across the desk and the customer picks up and goes, what? Yeah. You're a salesperson. I thought you were here to give me some free consulting. Well, you got me, so I better sign it, sort of thing. It's daft. Whereas, the best salespeople, I'm sure if people reflect for a second, the best salesperson they've ever worked with, and then if you stop thinking about yourself, because salespeople, we always think we're the best salespeople ever. So then maybe the second best salesperson you've ever worked with. What you'll find with that person is a lot of behaviors, in my opinion, and when I talk to people about this, which are things like they're the first person to say they're a salesperson. They're the first person to kind of qualify out if they don't think the opportunity is there for them. And so there's like a real correlation in my experience about the very best salespeople who are the ones that orientate closest to being salespeople and approaching their job as a salesperson.
I think it's simpler than that, Andy. I think there's just a big gap between used car salespeople that we don't want to be associated with. And obviously there's some great used car salespeople, but the stereotype, and we're going to lean into the stereotype because it makes us feel good in this scenario. And then there's actual salespeople, right? So me selling medical devices could not go to a surgeon and use weird used car salesperson, close-ended closing questions and things like that. Because they just say, get out of the operating room, never come back. And that's it. You've just lost like a multi-million pound account. Even with the, I don't typically sell the one-on-one training that we do at Salesman.org anymore, but I do most of the kind of 10 to 100 seat enterprise and large business deals and training that we do. Even with those individuals, a lot of them listen to the podcast. They tune into our content. They're a fan of me in the training. They're already halfway there to getting the deal done. It's just some of the kind of steps of MEDDICC and MEDDICC of the logistics and things that we need to get sorted to make the deal happen and to qualify them on the call. Even those people, I can't use all this weird old school sales on them because they're just going to hang up the phone and be like, that dude was two-faced. He said one thing on the podcast and then tried to do another thing with me. I think it's as simple as, Andy, you've got actual sales, which is what we're talking about here, which is understanding your marketplace, getting in front of the right people, doing a qualifying discovery call, understanding where the buyer is, where they want to be, maybe stretching that out a little bit and adding a layer of emotion and really emphasizing the pain and helping them understand that the pain they're in, getting them through the blockers, whether that be the status quo, the risk of change, things like that, and getting them from one side to the other. That's what sales is. But that word sales is on the other gulf of the kind of sales landscape is someone selling used cars or someone selling TVs in PC world. And I think the same word is used to describe two totally different industries. And hopefully our audience right now are in the kind of the far side, the large deal size, enterprise, medium-sized company, that side of things. So is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's very fair to say. I would be, as a former double glazing salesman, I have to defend my my peers in that industry and say that some of the best lessons I ever learned in sales that I still use today were learned double glazing selling. Honestly, some of the, and I think, if I people probably wondering what those things are. If I expand on what they are, it's very similar to how when I look at some of the most successful salespeople I've ever hired they've been former recruiters, and I think there's a lot to be said for the craft of sales, but there's also a lot to be said for the graft of sales. And I think that those types of industries where they really make you learn very early on that, there's a lot of art to sales, but there's also a lot of the numbers game involved as well. And so, I have a certain fondness for people operating at the sort of the less respected end of sales. I would, as someone that really struggled to get into B2B sales from that world, I would implore anyone that meets somebody who's in that world and you're thinking about hiring them, and you're looking at all their characteristics and you're thinking, this seems like a really high potential person, but I'm a bit put off because they don't have that experience at B2B. I know we're digressing here, but I'd say take a chance on that person.
Well, I think that's easily solved. Andy, if you got on a call with me in a job interview, you're obviously not an idiot. You're obviously not, again, like the stereotype that I was leaning into there. And so if you've got the traits of someone who's willing to put in the work, who understands the numbers, who isn't fearful of rejection, you've done the hard bit, right? That's all the mental game. That's becoming the person who can implement all of the modern tactics and what we're going to talk about in a second, MEDDICC, all the modern tactics and frameworks and procedures of a successful B2B salesperson. The hardest bit is becoming the person who can do the job, right? Anyone can read a book, anyone can memorize some stuff, but if you're not the person who can implement it, then it's all for waste.
Yes, I agree with that. Spot on.
Okay, so let's bring things back to the premise of the show, because we've digressed, and that's great. We can digress some more in a second. But what do salespeople get wrong about sales qualification? Is there one or two things, Andy, that people you see just getting wrong over and over and time again?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot recently, because I think it comes down to this. It's if I said the right way of qualifying is to identify if there's value for the customer and for ourselves that is there, that it's worth exploring. Another way of putting it. I think the way that people get qualification wrong is they approach the opportunity based on the perspective of, is there an opportunity here for me? Is there a deal here for me? And if you think about kind of traditional qualification frameworks, something like BANT, for example, which, I'm not going to criticize BANT. It has a place. I wouldn't say you could have it broadly as your qualification framework. But if you think about how that works, you approach a customer and you say, hey, do you have budget? Do you have authority? Do you need what I'm selling? And do you know the timing in which you're going to buy it? And if you think about that, and if you think back, a decade ago, 2 decades ago, there wasn't that much on offer to customers, particularly in my space of technology sales. You kind of just had a few different pillars, if you like. You had ERP, which actually covered probably 5 or 6 different categories that have broken out of it. You have CRM, you didn't even necessarily have marketing software. So generally what was happening when a customer approached you, they had a good understanding of, whether they needed what you're selling or not. Nowadays, I think there's something like 10,000 marketing technology companies. There's something like 1,000 new SaaS companies a week. And so the chances of when you approach the customer, them really understanding whether they need your solution and therefore whether they even have budget for it or the authority to buy it is quite unlikely. You're narrowing yourself in with that approach for people that are very, very well informed, of which of course there is people that, there are customers out there that do approach you well informed, but that's the RFP track. That's the inbound track. And, we know in sales now, so much revenue is driven outbound. So much revenue is driven by ingenuity at the top of the funnel, whether it be an SDR, a BDR, doing something wonderful to capture somebody's attention who's had 10 other people try to get their attention that day, whether it's somebody, boldly approaching someone at an event, or whether it's a marketing team with a brilliant campaign, whatever it is, those things, those little sparks of ingenuity that we need now to get the attention of our prospects in so many cases. If we then take that spark of ingenuity and then say, hey, we caught your interest with something we do, it might have even been a strap line, it might have been a screenshot of a dashboard. If we then go, do you need that? Have you got the budget for that? Then we're not going to get a very positive outcome, I don't think. And if we do, we haven't even got to what the problem is. And I think, you talked about the medical industry, and that kind of classic line that we all know and love in sales, which is giving medicine without diagnosis in healthcare is malpractice. But we so often do that in sales, don't we? We approach solution first, and that's kind of what we're doing when we qualify on that basis. We're approaching the customer who doesn't probably know much about what we do and saying, do you need what we do? And their answer is either no, or they're gonna not fully understand your full value, and you're not going to get into a really good conversation based on that.
Is this a lack of understanding our buyers' journeys, in that if we are replying to RFPs, we've probably already lost the deal because the salesperson's probably helped the buyer create the RFP, right? And that buyer is going to be informed. They've done their own research. We all know these statistics that the salespeople get involved further and further back in the buying journey. Are we, and maybe BANT's more appropriate in that kind of environment, as you kind of outlined. Coming back to MEDDICC, is this more appropriate when we are proactively trying to spark and help the buyer understand a pain point that they may have? So we're not reliant on them having gone through tons of content, tons of conversations with other salespeople before they get to us. We're not necessarily engineering the pain, but highlighting the pain, which is the role of a consultant, which ties us back to the beginning of the conversation. Is that where we should be going with this, so that we can then educate the buyer through their buying journey with our own content, with our own conversations, with our own insights? So then, obviously, the far side of this, they're far more likely to sign a deal with us than our competitor. Is that the future of all of this, of lead generation? To say to a buyer, hey, well, if you discover this problem yourself, you're going to do all this research, you're going to come out of it maybe with a solution one side, but give me 5 minutes now, I'll see if you've got the problem, I'll see if we can help, and then I'll guide you through the process towards the end of the sale, and in a consultative role instead. Is that what the future of this looks like?
Yeah, I think it comes back to a number of things that we know are really, really important, and we all buy into. Things like, the challenge yourself, for example, of kind of thought leadership, and it is said a lot that customers are much, much more informed these days than they were, because of analysts, because of review sites, because of peer reviews, because of better websites, better mediums like YouTube for finding things out. And I think that's all fair, but I do think it does miss out on the big opportunity that is there, that elite salespeople I see regularly grab hold of. This is the kind of thing that those elite salespeople will hate me for saying. It's like one of those, it's one of those things that's dead obvious though. So I think that people probably should use it more. But it's the idea of influencing the customer towards your strengths of your solution. And this is something, this in a MEDDICC context, this falls into the decision criterion. And typically people, when they think of the decision criteria, they think about it from a manner of approaching the customer and understanding what the criteria is in which they're going to base their decision. And so that's fine if it's an RFP and they've put a lot of thought or hired like an analyst or a consultant to build the RFP for them in a good situation. Like you said earlier, often it's written by your competitor. It's fine if they've already got this really sort of well set out decision criteria to try and adapt your solution to suit that. Of course, you're still going to want to try and influence it towards your strengths as well. But what that really misses out on is the huge opportunity that exists to be seen as a thought leader of your customer and approach. And what elite salespeople do is they will approach every single conversation with a very clear set of decision criteria that they want to influence the customer towards. So there'll be things that they know that their solution does differently or better than the alternatives on the market. And they'll be trying to influence the customer to understand the value of needing those things. So it therefore becomes part of the customer's decision criteria. And therefore, they've differentiated their solution and they kind of almost like put it onto the requirements without even almost the customer realizing that it's unique to them. That sets them up beautifully for, defending and differentiating themselves further on in the sales cycle where other competitors come in and, try and say they do the same thing. The customer can ask, well, do you do it like this? And, hopefully if you set it up properly, the customer should really understand the value and how you do it differently or better. I'll give you an example of where this happened for me recently. Was I was looking to hire a particular company, a vendor, to do something for me, and in the very first conversation, the first vendor we spoke to said, "Oh, from everything you've told us, you really should have this thing, 3-letter acronym thing." And I was like, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I knew about it, but I hadn't considered it for this project. And so all of a sudden, from that point on, they did a great job of explaining why it was valuable to me. I was like, yes, I absolutely need that thing. Every single vendor I met thereafter, I didn't even mention it to them that I was looking for that thing unless I really liked them and I wanted to give them the chance to show that they could do it. Because I felt if I go and say, hey, do you do this 3-letter acronym thing? Everyone go, oh yeah, we do that. So I was almost like holding it back and keeping it to myself as almost like a test for the vendor that I was going to pick. And it turned out that I didn't pick the first vendor, but I would have picked them. It was just not their model was not right. But if everything else would have been right with them, they would have won that deal hands down, no question about it. Because even if others could do what they said as well as them, because they were the ones that planted the seed. They were the ones that made me think, yeah, they're really, really thinking ahead on this stuff. And I think that's a really big thing. We're trying to buy some community software right now, and that every company website we go on has the buyer's guide, like the RFP primer, the comparison site, 10 things you need to consider buying community software, all that sort of stuff. And we've had to build like a spreadsheet of like decision criteria, things that we think we need. And there's a few things on there that the companies have done well, where they've kind of differentiated themselves and they've kind of put themselves strongly early on. But this is all, to your point, this is all happening before I've actually spoke to a salesperson. Now, if I actually got onto the phone to one of these people and they really understood what we were trying to do early on, and then were able to, sort of influence me, then I am so easy. I don't know if it's just me, whether it's a salesperson thing, but I feel like I'm very easy to sell to if you kind of understand my needs and adapt your solution to fit it. I
do this all of the time, Andy, and I'll just be straight about it. We just won a deal over Sandler, and what we do different over at salesman.org in our training program is online training program. It's killer, it's great, and it's been updated. I think it's like version 4 or 5 now that we're on, and it's effective. But what I found, this just before Christmas, we started experimenting with this, is that if I just jump on at least one call with everyone who signs up, just having done now like hundreds and thousands of these calls, right, and all these podcast episodes, I'm pretty good. It's not, I'm no genius or anything, just pattern recognition. I'm pretty good at spotting the 10, 20% of things that typically make 80, 90% of the difference. So I can say, hey, you're just sending this one crappy email. Why is that email going out? Stop doing that. And immediately Everything else improves later on down the sales cycle. Whatever it is, there's multiple things. You'd be able to do this as well, jumping on these consulting calls. So I really emphasize when we're selling against competitors, whoever that be, and we're the kind of like baby in the room, right? Versus like the beasts of Sandler and Challenger Sale by Gartner and all these large organizations, corporate visions. They're all great companies, and I've had people from all of these organizations on the podcast in the past, right? So it's a pleasure to compete against them. But I always double down on this idea that you're going to get me on an hour call, depending on what type of training package you sign up for your team, and I'll sit there and listen to them and give them no bullshit outside perspective insights on what they're doing. Now, maybe consultants do this, small businesses, individuals who do sales training, but no large corporate that I'm aware of does this. They'll do a group class, or they'll do a mixture of one thing or another. But you're just getting some random sales trainer. You're not getting the person that you're speaking to, the person that you're consuming the content of. I said we just won this deal against Sandler. It's like 100 odd seats, pretty good deal for us. Like nice kind of large deal size for our organization. It might be like a pleb sales. It might be a pleb number of seats for their organization. I have no idea, but like nice little deal for us this month. On the back of, they're like, well, can you do some one-on-ones, because that's what salesman.org are going to do. And they just refused to include it, no matter what the price. So we charged way more than what they did, but I influenced the customer, and rightly so, in these one-on-one sessions. Quick 45-minute call has like tremendous value, and they bought into that idea. They're going to see the benefits of it, and that won us a deal against a larger, more established company. So this is out of the realm for anyone to do. You just got to suss out what your strengths are, how you can implement it, and if there's any value that you as a salesperson can add on top of this as well, because there's a lot of salespeople out there with a lot of insights and ability to consult, and maybe a few phone calls, maybe an onboarding call or something might be valuable for your customers.
Yeah, and I bet the beautiful thing about that was and I guess it's why you were using it as an example, is the one-on-ones, were not necessarily, something you led with. It was you had identified, hang on a minute, there's something that I have in my offering that seems to be particularly strong to this particularly important to this customer. Therefore, I'm going to double down on those things. And what I'm sure you did, and what really elite salespeople do in those situations when they identify they have differentiation, is they almost the best case I ever see of it is they wrap the deal up where it's almost orientates entirely around that thing. It's like, okay, yeah, we're going to do some training. And of course, you're going to get that brilliant training we've talked about and, all that good stuff. But for me, I'm just so glad that we came to work together, because it sounds to me like this is the most important thing. This should be the priority one that we should really stick into. And that if of course, it only works if it's genuine. So we're not saying for a second that we kind of try and do anything other than find what's in our offering that is genuinely most impactful, most valuable to the customer. But so often we just skip past that bit of discovery straight into trying to talk about our solutions and miss out on all the opportunity to attach and uncover genuine value.
Yeah, and in this particular case, and this is why I love remote selling, I love Zoom everyone now is just happy to use Zoom or Skype rather than pushing beyond the phone. When I was chatting with this VP of marketing who got the deal signed, got the paperwork done, I could see him, like his eyes lit up as soon as I mentioned the one-on-one sessions. I just called him out. It's like, hey, you seem to have lit up when I mentioned that. And then he goes into the issues that he's had with training in the past and people not getting on top of it, and training companies promising one thing and then you never see them again further down the line, and they'll sign up to an online course or books or in-person training and it just doesn't have an effect. I was like, okay, great. So I'm kind of like just collating all of that. And then that's the follow-up email that I send. Hey, you said all of this. We solve all of this, all those problems. We solve X with Y. This is why we're a good fit to work together. Does it make sense to get the contract signed? It's dead simple. But I guess that's almost like the art of some of this. The science is you've got the MEDDICC process. You're going to ask certain questions. You're going to qualify appropriately hard and not feel uncomfortable asking some of these questions that can be not awkward. If you're speaking to someone who's actually a decision maker, most people are happy to answer MEDDICC kind of questions. If you're speaking to the wrong person, an end user, they're probably thinking, oh crap, this is probably a conversation for my boss. And so they might put the guard up a little bit. But when you qualify hard, you speak to the right person, you get the right answers, you can then facilitate the whole of the rest of the sales process, as well as feel comfortable putting in your own time into this because you know there's a decent chance of it turning out all right. So with that said, Andy, we've covered the decision criteria side of things. Are there any other steps in MEDDICC? Are there any steps in MEDDICC that people get nervous about diving into, whether it's the questions are a bit more personal, we're talking about cash now rather than just wants and needs. Is there any part of the process that you find people occasionally may skip over if they're not feeling so confident that day?
Yeah, there's a couple that I think stand out here, and they're very different for the kind of the reasons. I think the one that people tend to, I find, skip a little bit is the economic buyer. And for those that don't know, the economic buyer is the person of authority in the deal. They're generally the overall authority. They control the budget. So you could be selling to somebody who owns the budget, but above them, they're the controller of the budget. So they dictate how much budget the person you're selling to gets. They're the person that can create budget, stop budget. They have veto power. They're generally a senior person. And what I find happens a lot is that because it's hard to engage the economic buyer via nature of the fact they're a senior person, there's all these other sort of social dynamics going on in the deal. It means you can't go around people or go above people, that sort of stuff. People tend to go, it's hard. And actually there's a little bit of risk with it where I might upset the people I'm working with. And so I'm just not going to do it. And the analogy I use here is one from customer service, which is, that lovely saying of, we go the extra mile, which means, we do a bit more. And then there's that saying that gets built on the top of that, which is there's no traffic on the extra mile. I think engaging with the economic buyer is a bit like going the extra mile. You're working a bit harder, which means that hopefully you're working harder than your competition is. And therefore, when you are on that extra mile, there's less traffic there. And so because it's hard and because it can be, I don't want to use the word dangerous because I think the only time it's ever dangerous is your deal wasn't qualified properly. But because of that, it means that you're likely to be the only person engaging with the economic buyer in the opportunity in the deal, which for me means you're a cut above everybody else. So that's something I say there, and just tips, for people listening along, because again, even if you don't use MEDDICC, it's still very important that you engage with senior people in your opportunities. The biggest tip I can give here is to the sooner the better. We've all been those people where we've thought we've had a good deal, and everyone around us, our supporting team's been working with us, felt good about it. Then suddenly it's gone sideways. Something's happened. The competitors got the march on us. Some priorities have changed inside, something like that. And what tends to happen in my experience when those deals go sideways is you have like an urgent meeting goes into the calendar. Your boss invites you and other people in, and it's called like a war room or something like that. And everyone goes, right, what are we going to do? And always one is, I will reach out to the senior person who's probably the economic buyer. And then it's too late. You're literally rolling the dice at that point where you've got nothing else left to lose. And if you've done everything else right before then and you've engaged with them, you've kept them up to date in the project and the process, then and it has gone sideways, then yeah, okay, that's fair enough. That should be a good thing to do. But it shouldn't be your first engagement with them is when things have gone wrong. So that would be my advice, is to engage early and use your executive team. People worry about, I don't want to upset my champion. I don't want to upset my contact coach, whoever it may be, by going around them. Well, you don't have to. Use the economic buyer wants to hear from your boss more than they want to hear from you, just because of multi-level selling. So use them, and then it's not necessarily going around. It can be a very positive thing. It can be, hey there, Mr. and Mrs. Economic Buyer. My name's Will. I lead the team here for salesman.org in Europe. I heard that Andy and a couple of people in our team are working with Stephanie and Steve in your team. And all I keep hearing is great things about it. It sounds very, very exciting. We're particularly excited because of how we've helped X reference company that's going to, inspire the person you're talking to know that you're legitimate, know that you're credible. And all I wanted to do was just to let you know that I'll be, if this project does turn into something, then I'll be the executive sponsor for it. And I wanted to just open up this line of communication with you, should you have any questions of me. They've got a meeting next week. If it goes well, I'll let you know how it went. kind of thing. And there's no ask. That's the really important thing. You're not kind of like troubling them. You're not trying to get them to come to the meeting or anything like that. It's just engagement. And then, you've got the line of communication open then, which is better than not having it open.
Mm-hmm. So if I'm trying to identify the economic buyer and I'm not convinced the person I'm speaking to is the decision maker, economic buyer, person with the purse strings, I will jovially be, and I almost verbatim clap as I do this on a Zoom call. I'll be like, right, who bankrolls this? Who's in charge? Who do we need to get on board? What are we doing? Who's got the money? And I'll just throw a bunch of stuff out like that. And I'll see the other person kind of go, okay, and the pondering, and they typically give me a pretty straightforward answer. Now, I don't recommend other people necessarily do this because it takes a little bit of, not that I think I'm incredibly charismatic, but I can pull it off, a little bit of charisma to pull this kind of thing off. And again, a lot of people that I deal with are already familiar with me, the podcast or content. So I've already got that little bit of trust at distance and that bit of rapport before I even got on the phone. So I'll be like, right, who's financing this? How's this deal been done in the past? Deals like this been done in the past? Who do we need to get on side for this? I'll just throw that out there. Is there another way to, if someone's a bit nervous and they don't want to, because it's kind of full barrel what I just did there, or it can be, for people who want a more subtle approach, Andy, how would you recommend people, the audience, essentially ask if the person they're speaking to is the economic buyer, and if not, who is that person? What kind of questions would you be asking?
Yeah, I love how you said that. I think this is one of the great things about MEDDICC as well, is that it's a framework at its core. People call it methodology as well, which I think is fair enough. But at its core, it's a framework. And why that's an important thing in this context is it doesn't dictate your style, how you should talk to the customer, your personality, your tone of voice, all that kind of good stuff that makes you you and makes people trust you and feel that you're genuine. So what we're saying with MEDDICC, in this case, the economic buyers, we're saying you need to engage with the person, you need to talk to this person. So what you've just done there is a wonderful, wonderful example of how you can uncover that using your style. And like you said, not everyone will have the same style as you, which is fine. And I think also you've got this wonderful thing, which I didn't know existed before doing what I'm doing now, which is you're selling to salespeople. So you can almost just be like, right, I'm going to close you now, just so you know. And people are like, oh yeah, he's doing the close. Cool. I'm going to judge you on this one kind of thing. So people are a little bit more, give you an easier time of it than they would say if you're selling to like an HR director or something.
You say give an easier time. So these enterprise deals, these large deal sizes, it's usually a CRO, CMO, VP of sales. And so they're usually a bit of an arsehole for the first 10 minutes until I keep going back to that question. Hey, the way these calls usually go. And then eventually they relent. And then at the end of the call, they'll be like, oh, well, I'm just testing you, Will. See, our sales team are a big fan of you, but I wanted you to just see. So it goes both ways. Sometimes it's really pleasant. Sometimes you have to stand up for yourself a little bit, and you have to position yourself as an expert who, humbly, I've got expertise on these calls that some of these VP of sales, no matter how long they've been selling for, I've spoken to more salespeople than they have, very likely. I've interviewed more people than experts in the space than what they have. And so sometimes you need to lay down the law. So it can go both ways.
Spot on. Totally agree with that. Going back to the question, because I appreciate I kind of digressed again, but didn't answer it. So I think if you're a person that's finding it harder or finding, you don't quite know how to approach that situation of uncovering who the economic buyer is, you've got options. First things first is it's very unlikely you're the first person ever to sell to this company from the discipline of product that you're selling from. So if you sell marketing technology, or, if you sell, different type of technology, or if you're in a completely different space, there'll be peers in your industry that who have sold to that company and to maybe even the person you're selling to before. And for whatever reason, we don't tap into this enough in sales. We just don't. And even though we will know that someone else who's maybe even a former colleague or friend of ours has walked the path that we're trying to walk, we don't ask. So that's one option, is to say, hey, I'd call you up and say, Will, I saw on your website that you guys have got ADC as a reference on there. Did you the customer was, and you, and of course, say yes. I'm like, I'm struggling. I can't quite figure out who's the economic buyer or who's the person of authority. And you will tell me, or you might give me some clue. You might say, well, it was this person, but they left. Whatever happens, it's definitely not Steve. Steve was where I made a mistake. I thought it was Steve. And so you get free information. That's one example that you can do. Another thing that works very well, but again, this is very much a style thing, is I would often, and it would depend on the personality of my champion or potential champion candidate to be champion, let's say, or coach, I would often just level with them. And I would say, hey, look, a lot of people think that my job as a salesperson, what makes me a good or a bad salesperson, is my ability to do great presentations or to make, really cool demos and things like that. What really makes a good or a bad person when it comes to my job is to being able to understand who all the stakeholders are and make sure that I understand who's who cares about what, and to ensure that I consider everybody's needs, because you're my number one person. Of course, we can see that, and I'm very much focused on making sure that as we've uncovered, our value supports your goals, your challenges, whatever they are. But what about this person? And I'll start to sort of put in some suggested, my sort of suspected economic buyer. I'll be like, what about this person, the CFO, let's say? Normally, I find when I work with people in that position, I find that they, as much as they care about the things you're looking at, they're actually more interested in the total cost of ownership, or they're thinking more about how quickly this is going to return on investment, or what the opportunity cost will be. What do you think about that person? Is her name Stephanie, your CFO? Yeah, okay. And what when you typically work with her, what sort of things does she ask? And then you're into a conversation and then you can hopefully take the opportunity, if they're a true champion, or potential to be a true champion, to sell to them basically the value in them introducing you directly, which I think we just don't do enough. We just never ask the question. And this is another thing, and I'll only say this very quickly, but I think in our industry, we except for the odd daft, pretend sales guru on LinkedIn, I think everyone's bought into the idea of how important it is to have champions, right? But what we tend to do is we build our champions up, and we do a great job of that. But then we kind of just sort of sit back and look at them and sort of, bow before them and think what a great job we've done of building this person that really loves us and our product. We don't actually put them to work for us. We don't ask them to do the difficult things that we really, really need them to do for us, like pull legal calls forward, like sit on a procurement call with us and stick up for us where procurement's trying to disvalue our solution, or bring other people into the meeting, get security to take a call rather than you fill in their 30-page document. All those types of things, what champions can really help us accelerate our progress with. We almost sort of shy away because we don't want to we don't want to waste them. I don't want to upset my champion. I don't want to actually put them to work, because then they might not be my champion again. And then hang on a minute, what if I don't actually win the deal at all? And that's the way they should be thinking.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of what you just described comes down to the paperwork process as well. So physical paperwork, or just the buying journey within the account of a lot of salespeople. And I've been guilty for this in my medical device days of, hey, I got in, I spoke to the surgeon, I ejected, I went KFC on the way home and had a nice snack, and now I'm sat in front of the sofa, job done. But it's just gone into this black hole, right? We've no idea what's happening within the account. That might be the actual champion, but I've not guided that person. What I do is do a demo with them. They love the equipment, but then maybe they don't know what to do next. But we are selling these products and services day in, day out. So we probably got a pretty good overview across the market of what needs to happen, the paperwork that needs to be done, who needs to be in front of who. And I feel like a lot of salespeople just allow it to go into the black hole, tick a box, and then move on to the next inbound lead that they get, as opposed to doing account-based selling or account-based marketing of mapping out the account, working out who the actual champion is, the economic buyer, the other steps of MEDDICC or MEDDICC or whatever acronym whatever qualification methodology that we corporate we want to use, and corporate are telling us to use something else, right? You've got to see this through, right? Because what's the point in just doing that initial few steps if you're not going to get a deal on the other end of it? It's a waste of your time. It's a waste of company resources. Is there anything else that we need to add to that, Andy, to encourage salespeople to? I'll ask you this in a different way. So we can use MEDDICC or MEDDICC, whichever you prefer. Is it possible? Does the framework work if we miss steps out, or does it have to be done not necessarily in order, not necessarily with one person, but does it need to be done within the account to maximize our chances of getting the deals done? What I'm saying is, if we feel lazy and want to skip a bit, or we feel our confidence for whatever reason is down on that day, we don't ask a tough question, are we immediately dropping the effectiveness of MEDDICC or MEDDICC just rapidly, or is it possible to still get deals done by just doing this kind of willy-nilly?
Yeah, great question. The way I'll answer this question is how I think about MEDDICC, which is that I think about it as being three pillars. And I don't think anyone would ever argue with the importance of these three pillars in selling, which is the first pillar is value. So understanding the value of our solution, how we do it differently, all that sort of stuff. Second is stakeholders, which is not just who, but it's also like each stakeholder has a different value they're interested in, different pain challenge they're trying to solve. So those two are very interlocked. And the third one is process. And this one's the one that gets the least attention, but it's also the one that can have the biggest impact on your performance as an individual. It's long known that the biggest lever you can pull in terms of enhancing your performance as a salesperson, as a sales team, as a company, is not the amount of opportunities you have. It's not the average selling price of those opportunities. It's not your conversion rate. It's the time you take to close those opportunities. That is, if you can improve that one, that's the one that will have the biggest impact on your overall performance. They're all important, of course, but if we were just to like bring up share screen now and start scrolling LinkedIn, we would see 100 posts about pipeline generation, cold calling this, cold calling that, videos, blah, 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 which is all good, not knocking it for a second, before we saw one about conversion rate or about selling price, selling value. And then we'd probably see 1,000 before we'd see any, if at all, about the length of the sales cycle. So those sort of three pillars that I mentioned are all important. And if you were to think about MEDDICC sits on top of those, and it gives a framework so that you can make sure you're focused enough on each of those pillars. If you were to miss off one of those pillars, and you were talking about missing off the process, then it's going to have a really big impact. And I always say it like this: is, people will often say, I have this. Well, I don't have a saying; it's an industry saying of no champion, no deal; big champion, big deal. And people go, "Oh, hang on a minute, Andy. There was this one time where I didn't have a champion and I still closed the deal. So obviously that doesn't work." And it's like, well, yes, but I bet if we looked at that deal, you weren't actually selling; you were order taking. I bet your product and the marketing that your company did surrounding your product and the pain and the need that the customer had, you could have swapped you in and put anybody of any role who can just answer questions would have still solved that. So you're taking an order. So to your question, I think every time you put a little bit less attention onto, let's say, the letters of MEDDICC as you put it, you're qualifying worse. And people don't lose deals because there's no closed loss reason of like poorly qualified. What poorly qualified lost deal reasons look like is no champion, price was too expensive, couldn't get access, competition got ahead of us. Those are the reasons. That's poor qualification, because if you have MEDDICC in lockdown, you're either going to have one or two things. You're either going to have complete visibility of where you are in the deal, and you can see if you're winning or losing. It's like looking out a very clear day. Your deal is, you can see everything, you see everyone, all the stakeholders, everything you need to see. And because of that, you're going to know where you stand. And if you're looking out of that window into your deal and you see that you're losing, then you should qualify out unless you can fix it. The only way you're going to be able to fix it is if you have a champion. All of the things, all of the common objections about price, competition, not seeing the value, priorities, urgency, all those things, we all have tried and tested tactics, if you like, of overcoming those objections, and they're always very good. We're good at them. That's what makes us good salespeople. But we can only deploy those tactics if we have a champion to deploy them for us, because otherwise we're just sort of talking into an empty room. Because who's gonna take the good news we use and pass it on to other stakeholders for us?
Mm-hmm. I think to double down on your analogy there, if you don't think there's a champion, you probably just haven't uncovered the champion, and they've gone in and done all the sodding hard work on your behalf, and you're not even thanking them at the other end of it, right? Especially in a large corporate deal, nothing happens. There's so much status quo. There's so much emphasis on just not moving. There's the risk. There's the burden of taking on you might reduce your pain by 20% by using the product, but you're going to have to increase pain just for that short instance to get it implemented, to get everyone else on board.
Yes.
So there's probably always a champion there. You just weren't aware with them. I feel like I want to wrap up the show with this, Andy, and this thought that, I'm going to use this. I love your LinkedIn analogy of scrolling through, and it's all cold calls, cold emails, stupid polls about stupid, nonsensical things. There's very few people talking about process, methodology, for further down the sales funnel and the buying journey. And this is somewhat the water is somewhat muddied and murky in the fact that now a lot of companies will have SDRs, BDRs, account management, customer success, everything's getting split up. But the goal here isn't to generate leads. I don't care about number of leads. I care about number of customers out the other end of the process, right? Of course, the more leads we can generate, the more effectively that turn into customers, the better. But we get paid on people signing up to the product and then retaining them a lot of time. We don't get paid on the number of calls that we make, the number of emails that we send, and the number of people that we annoy with poorly qualified sales processes that just turn into junk in the CRM. So with that, Andy, I appreciate you, mate. I appreciate everything that you're about. I appreciate these frameworks. I appreciate your knowledge. There's not been a question that I've thrown at you this episode that you've not been able to answer. With that, tell us about the book, the training, and where we can find out more about you, sir.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Well, it's very kind of you to say. So yeah, so people looking to find out more, our proposition is very much around helping organizations to enable MEDDICC in their teams. So for me, you can go on, you can Google MEDDICC and find blog posts that will tell you what the letters mean and what they stand for. That's like scratching the surface of what actually it becomes to be a full organization using MEDDICC. And so what our proposition very much is about is giving everybody enough expertise about MEDDICC, not just on the knowledge and the wisdom of how and what it is, but how to actually execute it, how to, like we talked a little bit about economic buyer, all of the actionable tactics and strategies you can use to bring MEDDICC into your deals, into your teams, so that it can become the common language. So like you just said there, across SDRs, BDRs, AEs, CSMs, leadership, even like go-to-market teams of product marketing, of all the teams surrounding the customer, they can use it as a common language. So everyone's more cohesive. Everyone knows exactly what they're looking at with customers, and they're much more efficient as an organization. And the best bit, the customers prefer it as well, because you orientate around the things that matter to them around value. So that's our proposition. We have, there's a book which you can find on Amazon. We also have an online course called the MEDDICC Masterclass. But before, if you're just sort of thinking, well, this sounds interesting, you just want to dip your toe into the water, we also have a YouTube channel as well, which you can find lots more of me talking about this kind of stuff, if that's what you're interested in.
Amazing stuff. Well, I'll link to all of that in the show notes to this episode over at salesman.org. And with that, Andy, I thank you for your time, your insights on this, doubling down on the fact that I just thrown a load of random questions at you that were basically nothing to do with qualification and MEDDICC, and you went through them all absolutely seamlessly, so that shows your expertise in the space. And with that, I want to thank you again for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Thank you, Will, and thank you for all you do for our industry.